Welcome viewers, welcome back. I'm Frederick Noronha and this is another program of Literary Goa, the program where we look at books and authors who worked on issues related to Goa. Today we have with us a book called The Great Goa Land Grab, and the occasion is that one of the authors of the book is here with us, and we are very grateful to have not for the second time, that is Solano da Silva, but also just in is Heather Bedi, who has been working on Goa for a long time. Heather, tell us a bit about the book, your work on Goa, your understanding of land, because all of a sudden, since your book is out about maybe 6 months or a year back, land has become a huge issue in Goa and it's widely being debated, if I'm right. So tell us.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for this opportunity, and it was a pleasure to actually print this with Frederick's publishing house, 1556, because we wanted to make sure this important issue actually got out to people in Goa, and so this was really a way to ensure that people here had a chance to get the information. So essentially what we're really interested in is looking at the importance of land. So why is it that people are connected to land in Goa? What is the cultural value? How does land get passed down from generation to generation? What happens when agricultural land is lost and food insecurity issues arise? And what we were seeing over the last about 15 years is that there's been a loss of a huge amount of land in Goa to a range of purposes, from industrial estates to ports to special economic zones. Now we're seeing a lot of land loss for big development projects, like recently the Boram Bridge is one that's led to opposition among farmers and local community members. And there's a real interest to kind of have more development for the state of Goa, but also you have land loss as well. So what we were really interested in the book is to understand how land has been taken away in Goa and what are the local implications. How are people receiving that? How is it affecting people? And how are they actually trying to change some of those patterns?
Also, Solano, if I could just get you in here itself, land speculation, do you see that as part of land loss? Because, suddenly Goa has become fashionable. Everyone wants a holiday house here. And so in that sense, land prices are shooting up beyond what most people could afford. So is that part of land loss in your view?
Yes, Frederick, it is. For instance, it was startling to note that the 2011 census already showed us that we had 22% of unoccupied housing. Of course, this needs to be very closely investigated. Are these new dwellings? But there is a mindset around about a lot of the activity, economic activity around land to be speculation. And this is happening in many major cities as well, and Goa is becoming a very fashionable site for that. Yes.
Yeah, so how did your interest in land start and since when?
My interest in land began during the 2011 regional plan, when it affected my village in a very stark way, where the zoning had completely overrid everything that we thought was real in life. For example, a lake being made into a settlement zone, our forests going up in flames. This palpable sort of change happening right in the neighborhoods, the places where we grew up as children, got me interested in land related issues.
Heather, globally speaking, how is land seen? How acute is the debate in different parts? Is it a third world issue? Is it an urban issue? Is it an urbanizing issue? Is it an issue of equity? How does the...
I think it's a global issue for sure, but I do think that how Goa is realizing and being so impacted by it is not unique in terms of what's happening in India and global. But I think here you see it in such an acute manner, as Solano notes, because you have such a limited amount of land space. And land is something in Goa that culturally is passed down from generation to generation. And so in Solano's village, to have that change, there's definitely families that will not have the land needed to pass down to the next generation, or have the land that they were using agricultural to grow different items on. And so when you have those challenges over time, I think with each passing generation, as prices go up, as more speculation increases, as Solano notes, it becomes more challenging, I think, for the next generation to actually realize their dream of staying in Goa, of having a lifestyle here, of having a family connection to where they're from. Because Solano's right, a lot of folks from other parts of India are very interested in buying second homes here, having a holiday experience. And we see this globally, that land has become something where we see widespread dispossession. People get separated from their actual land.
While we are on this point, I've heard it being said that you lose your land, you lose your identity. Is that true? Is it an exaggeration? How?
No, I think it's absolutely critical, and I think here you see it everywhere. If you go to a village in Goa and spend any time, people know everyone in the village. They can refer to people by name, and they're able to kind of tell you or figure out who you are based on where you're living or where your friends or family are living. And so in that way, I think Goan culture and identity is intimately connected with the land. But I think the challenge with what's happening now is people are getting priced out of the market. So if they want to buy a house in the same village where their family is from, if they don't have a big enough compound to live on, I think that's where you see the challenges come up. But I do want to reemphasize culture is a huge piece of the picture here, but livelihood is the other really big one. So if people don't have access to the land they need to buy the food in order to feed themselves and their family, I think there's real challenges. And I think a misperception about Goa is that it's a wealthy state and there's no one in need. But there are houses in this state that are not paka. There's a huge amount of food insecurity in some places in pockets. So even though Goa's overall statistics look good in terms of development indicators, in terms of access to food, in terms of poverty, those issues still persist and are still a challenge. And so again, when we have land loss, the people who are most likely to get affected are people that are probably already marginal in some way in the society that need access to those lands to grow food, to feed themselves and their family.
That's very well put. I think Heather has kind of linked it up to the many different issues that land is connected to. But Solano, from your point of view, how do you see the similarities or differences between the Goa land debate and maybe the way the same debate is affecting other parts of India, whether it's big cities or smaller places, holiday places in India, or maybe in the rest of the world? From your reading, from your understanding, how does it compare and contrast? I'm just trying to get a lay of the land.
Yeah. In my view, one of the things that pops out is that Goa is a sort of an urban network. It's one of the most urbanized parts of India. This is a statistic that surprises many because the idea of Goa with its lush green fields, proximity to the ocean, the Western Ghats on one side, and this tourist image of it is so fused with natural systems that you fail to realize. And I think there is something to do with planning over here. Because Goa has had zoning right from the 1980s, we were able to have this mix. It is the site of fierce contestation, but it has also given us a kind of a unique kind of urbanism, if you like. And I think this is something special. It is to be safeguarded, looked into very deeply. As Heather was saying, why can we not imagine our urban spaces having close proximity with agricultural spaces, all the ecosystem services close by? Why should they be seen as to be confined to rural areas? I think this is something very special, and it is something to be grasped and thought about deeply, rather than going the urban route of large Indian cities that nobody wants to live anymore, and they're actually flocking and seeking refuge. We know what's happening in Delhi.
Some of them are unlivable in that sense.
Like Delhi, it's shocking.
You can't get fresh air to breathe in that sense.
It's shocking that then what is the point of that kind of urbanism? Yes.
So Heather, could you do one thing and just explain what's in the book and what was your contribution to it?
So over the last 15 years, Solano, De Silva, and then our colleague Kenneth Bo Nielsen at University of Oslo, we collectively and individually wrote pieces on different issues in the Goan context. And so the idea for the book really came up to bring that work together to understand collectively what is happening across that time span in Goa. And then now I think the interesting thing, and Solano's work picks up on this, is to see what's changing now. So my piece of this puzzle was really about special economic zones, SEZs, and thinking about how they impacted villages, industrial areas, and how there was a lot of local contestation and opposition to the special economic zone model, how people felt like it was incongruent, not connected with their cultural values, their ecological values, but they also felt like they didn't have a voice and a say in what was happening to their land with these large industrial estates coming in. I remember in one village, people told me there that they felt like they would need a passport to actually get into the special economic zone, and they felt like it was a different country, a different state from their village, that really kind of cut off access to grazing land, but also other resources that that village had historically used. So when you have models that are coming in that, again, feel so different from local land values and local cultural values, I think that can really lead to a lot of challenges. And so what Solano and Kenneth and I did collectively was to put together our work, so my work on special economic zones, Kenneth's work on Tiracol. Solano's done excellent work on the regional plan and really getting into very technical specifics in terms of legally how zoning laws have changed over time. And so we brought these different articles and areas together to understand collectively what is the Great Goan land grab and how is that changing over time.
Talking about SEZs, I'll take a minute to share a small story. You know, what shocks me is that very often all these decisions are based on so little information, and the citizen gets the least information at all of all of it. One fine day it so happened that, you know, I was in the press room and some activist from the Right to Information campaign, RTI, he passed me this statement and he said, see, this is what is the latest we got on SEZs. And I just took it home and forgot all about it, and I was sleeping over it for a long time. And then one fine day on Saturday, I thought like maybe I could share it with fellow journalists. So I just did that. I scanned it and put it out on the net. That time WhatsApp was not there, maybe email or something. And the next day, one paper picked it up. It was in the headlines, and it became a big issue. Like, you know, it's all hit and miss the way we are tackling these issues. There is, and then subsequently, you know, the SEZs descended on us with so much alacrity, if that's the right word, and then they vanished also with that much alacrity. So it's really strange how these things happen. Solano, coming back to you, like we have seen this issue shoot up suddenly, and I think your work has also contributed a catchy title. I'll ask Heather to explain it next, but we've done a bit of it already. The catchy title and all this have kind of brought this issue in the news, and in the last year or 6 months, there has been a lot of discussion going on this. So, like, you know, there are activists who are talking about how particular villages are being impacted, and then there are questions coming up in the assembly which show how much land has got transferred and those kind of things. So you know, there is much information coming out. What, according to you, is the most 2 or 3 of the most important things that have happened, say, since your book has come out? I forget when it was, a year back or?
Approximately a year back.
Yeah.
That's, I'm trying to think what the impact of it would be.
No, maybe because of the book, or I'm saying independent of the book. Like, you know, the debate has really shaped up a lot, it seems.
I have observed regular headlines or small blurbs in the newspaper using this term, the Goa land grab. This has almost become common parlance now. But under this term come a number of sub-phenomena. All of them are not the same thing. Some may be regarding some properties of absentee landlords. The others could be about zoning, which normally attracts my attention because I try to keep some track of that. Or the others about the loss of land, as Heather mentioned, for industrial projects, and what it means for Goan identity, because this Goan identity seems to be relational, and one of those key relationships is tied to land. Thinking, going back of the Gaonkari system, people would somehow, the person would be associated with the village she comes from, etc. And so that seems to be, so a number of these phenomena around land seem to have been often captured using this title of the Goa land grab, for which we don't have any credit for. We're glad to say that it's become common parlance, I think. But it needs to be teased out because there are a number of sub-processes under this.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Heather, we have met a long time back in the past, I mean, many years back. What fascinates you about Goa as a place for research? You think it's very different from the rest of the Indian reality. It doesn't even fit in there, like, someone sometimes people who see it at first glance would say, oh, Goa is different from India and all that. So what attracted you to?
Well, I have to say it was 15 years ago when I first met you, and you were very welcoming and kind of open arms in terms of getting me contacts and getting me oriented to the local system. And I think that's emblematic of my experiences here, that people have been so friendly and so welcoming. So even if I was just visiting a small village, people would invite me in for a chai and ask me to spend time, which I always think about in the place that I come from. Like, would people welcome people in and be so friendly and welcoming? I'm not sure. So I think there's something really special in terms of if people know that you're interested in the culture, you're interested in spending time here and getting to know people, that there's really an openness to sharing and to kind of spending that time. But I just wanted to circle back to Solano's, what we were just talking about as well, because I think what's happening right now with the zoning is really interesting, and you might be getting there as well. But there's definitely very interesting things that you've been thinking about in terms of how these kind of changes are happening at a smaller scale, but they're leading to larger problems.
Yeah. In the sense, what seems to be happening is that we seem to, one of the ways we have explored, that we've tried to explore in the book, is to look at the institutions that govern land as a rule-making system, as a system of rules. You know, to use a very scarce resource like land, you need a set of rules. And they are there in the institutions we have. They are there in CRZ. They are there in the Town and Country Planning Act. They are there in the PDAs and ODPs. They are there in various sort of they are there in the Comunidad systems, in all the agricultural. What are these? These are a set of rules that tell us that there is a benefit in sticking to these rules and judiciously using scarce land resource. Now, what we've been seeing is that these rules are being undone for select parties. And tracking that, and because that's all done in a small piecemeal way, the recent one being 17.2, the amendment proposed. Small changes that are going of the Town and Country Planning Act, where select parties can approach the Town and Country Planning Board and say that my parcel of land should be exempted from the zoning of that is mandated by the regional plan. So we have just tracked all of this, and in a very short few months since that amendment has come, we have seen 4 lakh square meters of land being converted. Interestingly, 45% of this zone changes are only in 3 villages: Asagaon, Morji, Anjuna. Just 45% is only in that. And we know the kind of real estate. The names of the applicants has been hidden away. Why would a government that is accountable to the public hide away these things? I mean, this is part of a court case, but we're tracking these things because these small changes, they go under the radar. And the changes, where the changes are happening, as Heather has been repeatedly speaking about our food security, they are agricultural land that is being lost. Now, when we speak, I just want to bring this point because it struck me very deeply. ICAR, which we have the benefit of being in Goa, the scientists at ICAR who study soils told me that to make 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters of fertile soil, it takes something like 600 years. And they've been vehemently telling the government that we need a soil survey, and that is an important layer of information we must have. We must never encroach into fertile soils. We're destroying millennia of what nature has done. And we're doing things that are really going to be problematic in the long run.
What I find fascinating is that you all have taken the job of studying this field and going into it in so much depth, and kind of staved off the criticism that academia is only in the ivory tower, not connected with people's issues. Here you all are taking a very live issue, and a very inconvenient one also, because it touches on the toes of so many influential folk and things like that, not likely to win friends and influence people. But having said that, I mean, from either of you all, do you all see a kind of a shift across the different decades of how land pressure has come onto Goa? Maybe initially in the 60s, 70s, a few big projects on the ports and those kind of things. Then in the 80s, the first signs of mega tourism projects coming in, both in Bardes and Salset, 70s and 80s, of course. And then the Konkan Railway and the protests it brings about. But do you see some kind of trajectory where we have government projects, mega government projects, or then real estate projects, and then individual kind of wanting to change the land. Is there some kind of pattern you can see here?
Heather,
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really interesting about the Goan context is there's a history of opposition, whether it be the fisher worker people struggle or things that happened with comunidades. So I think there is a real interest for local communities to come together and focus when there's a problem, whether it would be environmental or land or cultural. But I think it's challenging to have continuity across the different struggles across time because players change and there'll be different levels of capacity to engage on different issues. What I've seen in the last 15 years is that there's been a coalescing of different people coming together and a range of people in a distinct set of ways, including Solano, who are really looking at the nitty-gritty of what's happening and with these changes, which is really necessary. Whereas some of those previous struggles may not have had people that had the technical skills to actually follow some of those changes. But I do see a real strength here, and I know that the Special Economic Zone movement inspired movements in other parts of India as well, because it was so successful in terms of stopping it. So I would go to meetings in other parts of India and people would talk about the SEZ struggle here. They would gain strength from that. They would think, okay, if they were able to do that in Goa, we'll have the capacity to do that elsewhere. I think what's different right now in Goa, and Solano can speak to this, is that there's so many different things happening simultaneously that I think trying to keep track of that and keep people's attention is really challenging because people are busy with their everyday lives, and unless it's affecting their village, sometimes it's difficult for them to follow that. And in a place like Anjuna, there might not be, there's still people that are from that village and living there, but there's also so many other people. So I think it's challenging for those people that Solano was noting earlier, that 22% back in 2011, it's probably much higher now, of people that have second homes in Goa. If they're in Delhi, if they're in Mumbai, they may not be following the day-to-day in terms of what's happening with the land use change. But I do think that there's that long history of struggle, and I do think that creates a lot of opportunities, but there's still major challenges as well.
Yeah, I would like to respond to your question slightly. I mean, Heather took us through the opposition movements and various phases and responses. I think that soon after liberation, one of the things that we saw in terms of land use policy was to create a developmental state in sort of setting up industrial estates, and very importantly these agricultural law tenancy acts, which were about social justice. There was also this movement to create housing, affordable housing, through the housing board societies, etc. All of this has quietly gone away.
Been forgotten.
It has gone away in favor of market-led solutions. So for example, we are led to believe that anything that works for the market, for commercial interests, will also create development jobs, etc. And we find very little of that. We find a whole host of problems. It is, I think, problematic, and it requires us to tease out. Today we seem to be moving, this whole idea of social justice, for example, is sidestepped. And it is about enabling, opening more and more spaces for commodification of land, in the belief that this is what development means.
To play devil's advocate, supposing you all had to become policy planners tomorrow and you all had to cope with all these pressures and, big money interest and people knocking at your doors at all times, how would you try to balance it off, and what advice would you give, say, to policy planners, since academia is seen as just doing a theoretical job? Okay, you don't have to deliver results at the end of the day, or your results are some other results, but you're not facing the pressure. So how would you advise policy planners to look at such issues, for example, since you are seeing the underbelly of it? You are seeing where it really hurts.
Yeah, I think one of the key ways that this has come up as an option in terms of changing the balance of power, because there's really an unequal balance of power right now in terms of communities, in terms of decision makers. So in other places with other issues, the way they've reframed that unequal balance of power is actually to have communities directly involved with decisions, with changes in their area. Not just community leaders, but actual community members representing a range of different stakeholders. So maybe not just the panchayat, but beyond that, a range of people that would be affected, and actually actively having them make decisions, which is very involved. It takes a long time. But in such a small geography like Goa, I think it actually is really worthwhile, because I think long term it's going to be a huge challenge if this rate of land loss continues, I think it's going to lead to a lot more challenges for the state and for people who are originally from Goa. And so I think rethinking through who makes decision and also who can have a new seat at the table in terms of who can make those changes.
Yeah.
Heather and Solano, it's so nice to have you all here because,
Thank
this you all have taken time off your busy schedules to discuss this very crucial issue for Goa from Goa's point of view. But I won't let you go before asking one last question. This is not related to what we are talking till so far, but since you all are in academia, what do both of you all think are maybe the 3 or 5 most important questions that researchers, young researchers, Goa-focused researchers should be looking at in Goa today? Issues which are not getting enough attention, for instance.
Hello.
Well, I am going to do a very broad brush, and then I would love Solano to add here. So what I always tell my students is to go or spend time wherever it is that you're interested in studying and really understanding, and just listen to people. Read the local newspaper if you can in the language that's available, and just spend time and listen. And that was actually how, a lot of my connections came up, and just understanding what people were concerned about and what the challenges were, rather than coming in with an imposed idea, as you said, from kind of the academic ivory tower. So I'll let Solano add more specifics there.
You have to give us some bullet points.
Bullet points. Oh,
because
Fred.
because youngsters would like to take the benefit of your long years of research, your studies abroad, your mentoring of so many other people, and your very acute understanding of the Goa situation also.
I think one of the areas, so I don't want to sound like I'm preaching to anyone, this is an agenda for myself as well. As a student of, I have some train, as a student of economics, I want to revisit some of the assumptions of economics itself. For example, the idea that we can have infinite growth in a finite planet
becomes very, very visible in Goa, no?
Is a fundamental premise that needs to be re-questioned. And I think there are schools in economics which unfortunately are not being taught, but it is so vital that we revisit this. Just so for students of economics and development like me, this is how can, for example, we design economic systems that are based on the principles of nature. Could we imagine this? How could we design economic systems that are about social justice embedded in them, not as welfare measures that we then put on around a very extractive commercial economic system? There, for me, is one such issue. Could we even think of land differently as a collective? And it may sound very radical, but there is a report on urbanization today that has come out just in the last month. It has looked at cities across India and abroad, and the critical finding of this report is to begin quickly imagining the urban space and urban land as a collective pool, not as a site for private speculation and contestation, but as a common pool. Because land is related to livelihoods, life itself. It's like the saying by this American ecologist whose name I'm forgetting. He says, what I stand for is what I stand on. I stand on land, and I learn from land. I listen closely to how land works, and those are the principles for my life.
Food for thought. Thank you so much.
Thank
with
you.
That, it's a nice point to wind up on and to leave our listeners with something to think about. Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Solano, for coming and
Frederick.
taking the time. All the best in
Thank
your
you,
future
Frederick.
endeavors.